Hi Silem stars, you're welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you guys how to make this lovely side gathers bustier dress. If you want to see how we do this, definitely keep on watching.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there.
So the first thing we're doing now is I'm just marking the baseline at the top of my paper, and then from that baseline, I'm marking the armhole line, which is 8 inches, the bust point line 11 inches, under bust line 14 inches, waistline 17 inches, and hip line 23 inches. Then I'm just going to label all those lines: chest line, bust point, under bust, waistline, hip line. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide my shoulder measurements by 2, mark that on the baseline and on the chest line. Then I'm going to connect both points with a straight line, and then from that baseline I'm going to come down by 1 inch and mark that point. For my neck width rather, I'm using 3 inches, and for the neck depth I'm also using 3 inches. I'm going to connect both points with a curve, and then I'm going to draw a slanted line to create my shoulder slope. I'll measure what I have from that shoulder slope to the chest line and get the midpoint. Then I'm going to go in at that midpoint by half an inch. On the chest line, I'll divide the bust circumference by 4, mark that, and then I'm going to connect all 3 points with my curve to create my armhole curve. The next thing I'll do is to divide my bust span measurement by 2, and then I'm going to mark that. That gave me 4 inches, so I just marked that all the way from the under bust to the chest line all the way down to the hem of the paper. Okay, now I'm going to divide what I have on my shoulder by 2, and then I'm going to connect that to that bust span divided by 2 that I marked. So this is what we're going to have. On the under bust line, I'm going to go out on both sides of that bust span. I'm going to go out on both sides by 1 inch. I'll mark that all the way down to the hem. So make sure you're doing this from the under bust all the way down to the hem. Make sure you're marking 1 inch on both sides. Now I'm going to connect all those points together with a straight line. Now, because I don't want the bust point area to be too pointy, I'm going to go down from the bust point by half an inch and up from the bust point by half an inch. Okay, this is very important so it doesn't get pointy. Now I'm going to use my curved ruler to just connect those points together. Now from the shoulder there, or the baseline, I'm going to decide how deep I want my piece to be. So I want it to come down by 7 inches from the shoulder, and then since it's a sweetheart neckline, the center part, okay, is going to be 8 inches. The highest part is 7 inches and the deepest part is 8 inches. So I've just marked that 7 inches right there. Now on that 7 inches point, I'm going to do my over bust tightening. I'm going to go out on both sides of that line, of that dot line there. I'll go out on both sides rather by half an inch, okay? And then I'm going to use my curved ruler to just connect the points like this. And then I also use my curved ruler now to create the sweetheart neckline that I want, down to that 8 inches, which is the chest line. And on the other side, I'm going to connect it also to the chest line as well. On both sides, I'm using curves to connect them. And then I'm just shading my dots so we're not confused. So now it's time for us to, mark our body measurements and replace our dots. So I've already marked my body measurements on the chest line. I'm just replacing my dots now. And then for my sewing allowance, I'm leaving 1.5 inches allowance. On the under bust line, I'm going to mark the round under bust divided by 4 there. I'm going to measure what I have on my dots. What I have there is 2 inches. I'll replace my dots and then I'll add my 1.5 inches sewing allowance. The same thing I have on my under bust, I'm going to mark that same thing on my waistline. And then for the hip line, I'll divide the hip circumference by 4. Mark that. My dart is also 2 inches. I'm going to replace that 2 inches dart. And I'm going to add 1.5 inches sewing allowance. So I'm just going to connect all the points. Now what I have on my hip line, I'm going to mark that same thing on the hem of my paper. And then I'm going to connect that with a straight line. So now I'm going to add my bust dart. Now to do that, I need to know my shoulder to waist in front and that of the back. My shoulder to waist in front is 17 inches and my shoulder to waist at the back is 15.5. And when I subtract that, that gave me 1.5 inches. Now I'm going to take out my sewing allowance like I've done now so I can put in my bust dart. Now from the bust point downwards, I just marked 1.5 inches and then I connected that to the bust point there. I did not let it get to that bust span line. I left about quarter of an inch, okay? And then now I'm just cutting everything out like so. This bust that actually helps your piece in front and at the back to be equal at the waist, okay? It's very, very important. Now for the back piece, I'm just marking my zipper allowance line, which is 1.5 inches, and I also marked the baseline as well. Now I'm going to be using the front piece to, draft my back. So I'm just marking um all the vertical measurements. Now for my back waistline, I'm going to use 15.5 inches and not 17 inches for my back waistline, okay? Which is why we put in our bust dart in the first place. So other than that, I'm just marking, the outlines we have. For my neck width for the back, I'm also using 3 inches, okay? But for the waistline, like I said, I'm using 15.5 inches. So I'm just marking all the lines, all the important lines. So the bust span line is what I'm marking now. So I'm sure that is the same for both front and back. And then I'm just extending all of those lines. I'm also marking that bust span line because it's going to help me to create my darts for the back. So now I'm labeling the lines: chest line, bust point, under bust, waistline, hip line. Now for my shoulder, I'm dividing my shoulder by 2, which gave me 7 inches. I marked that on the baseline and on the chest line, and I'm connecting both points with a straight line. The neck width for the back is also 3 inches, but for the front, for the depth rather, for the back neck depth, it is 2 inches. I'm coming down from the baseline by 1 inch and connecting that to the neck width to create the shoulder slope. And then I'm going to measure what I have and get the midpoints. Instead of going in by half an inch, I won't do that just like we did. I won't do that the way we did it for the front. I'm just going to draw a curve from that midpoint to the chest line to create my armhole curve. Now, as you can see, this is my waistline for the back. And as you can see, it is 1.5 inches different from the front. Now on that waistline, I'm going to go out on both sides of that dart line or the bust span line by half an inch, okay? Remember that for the front we did 1 inch for the dart, but for the back we're doing half an inch, okay? And I'm going to connect all the points together. Now from the chest line there, I'm going to come down by 1 inch and mark that point. You can also use half inch if you want. I think I actually used half inch for mine. So I'm coming down from the chest line by half an inch, then I'm connecting it to the waistline to create my dart. Now I'm going to measure my bust circumference, mark that. I don't have any darts to replace at that chest line. For the under bust line, I'll divide my under bust by 4, mark that, and I'm going to measure my dart. My dart is about 1 inch. I'll replace that, okay? My 1 inch dart is there. I'm going to replace that. And then what I have on my under bust, I'm going to mark that on my waistline as well. For the hip line, I'll divide the hip circumference by 4, mark that. My dart is also 1 inch. I'm going to mark that as replace the dart, as you can see. Now what I have on that hip line, I'll mark that same thing on the hem line. I'm going to connect all the points together. So as you can see, I'm not adding any sewing allowance. I'm going to be adding my sewing allowance when I transfer it to my fabric. So as you can see, this part we have here is excess. We have that excess because for the front, we had 2 inches for the dart, but for the back, we have just 1 inch for the dart. Now I'm going to go in by 0.75 inches at the waistline, and I'm going to connect that to the chest line and hip line just to remove any form of zipper bulging. Now I'm going to come down at that center back by 1 inch, and then I'm going to curve that, okay, just so that the back is not straight, okay. You can leave your back straight if you want, but for me, this is how I want the back to be curved, okay. Now I'm just cutting out my piece. I'm also cutting out the darts we have as well, and I'm cutting the piece open because we're going to have these as separate pieces. Now for the front, I've cut out the yoke. If you want to use the yoke, you can actually use that part that I cut out. But for me, I'm not going to be using the yoke. I'm going ahead now to cut out the pieces. I'm going to also cut out my dart. I've labeled my piece, that is the center front, and I've indicated where the fold is going to be, or where the fold is rather. So now to close my bust dart, I'm going to add a bit of paper by the side. Okay, I'm just going to tape it in place, and you're going to see why I added this paper in a minute. So now I'm just going to fold my paper in order to close my bust dart, okay. So once I close it like this is what we're going to have. I'm going to tape that in place as well. Now if you look closely, you're going to see that the line is no longer straight. So that's why I added that extra piece of paper. So now I'm going to draw a new line that is straight from the top all the way to the waist, and then I'm going to cut that out. So if you're making this and you're going to add your bust dart, there's no need to add your sewing allowance. You can do that when you are transferring it to your fabric. So this is what we have here now. So if you look closely now, you're going to see that the back waist and the front waist of my piece now align, okay. They now align. That is the beautiful part of using a bust dart. Now from the waistline, I'm going to mark 4 inches downwards. This is where the curve is going to start, okay. From that hip line there, I'm going to come down by 5 inches, okay. So from the waistline, 4 inches downwards, and then from the hip line, 5 inches downwards. Now I'm going to use my curved ruler to create a nice curve, okay. Make sure that the curve is neat. And then I'm going to cut out that piece. For the side back, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to place that piece that I cut out from the front. I'll place it on the side back, and I'm going to cut that out as well. And then I'm going to label that this is the back. Now these pieces you have here, I'm going to use them for my slash and spread. So make sure that they are mirror images like this. Make sure you place them like this in a way that they are mirror images. Now I'm going to measure what I have here, and I'm going to divide the piece into 3. So whatever you have, just divide it into 3. So when I measure mine, I have about 6.6.5. So dividing that into 3 gave me about 2.2 thereabouts. So if it's in decimal, just approximate it basically. And then I'm just going to draw a straight line, and then I'm going to label each of the pieces, okay. So label each of the parts and then cut that out. It's important that you label it so that when you cut it out, you don't get confused. If you don't label it and you go ahead and just cut it out, you're going to get confused. You're not going to know which one would go where. So these are the pieces we're going to use now. So this technique is called slash and spread. So I've gone ahead to slash it, and then now I'll place it on my fabric and spread it. So the distance that I'm spreading my piece, this fabric is 60 inches wide. Now I'm spreading it, since I have 6 pieces of the paper, I'm spreading it by 10 inches, okay. So 60 inches divided by 6 pieces, that gave me 10. So the distance between each of the papers is 10 inches. So just place one paper, mark 10 inches, place the next one, like that, all the way to the end. Make sure you pin your piece in place so that it does not move. Now the length of this my actual dress is longer than the length of my pattern paper. So now that I'm transferring the pattern to my fabric, I'm going to increase the length. Now I made sure to place the pieces all on all on the same line at the bottom, okay? They're not on the same line at the top, but they are on the same line at the bottom. That's why I drew a line at the bottom of all of the pieces. So make sure that your pieces are on a straight line at the bottom so that you're sure of your length. And then I'm just going to mark the outline of the pieces as you can see me doing right now. And then I'm just cutting along that, outline that I marked. And my piece is also folded, okay? My piece is folded. I'm using a Mikado silk fabric and I used about 4 yards of Mikado silk for this entire dress. So now I'm taking out all the pattern pieces. So as you can see, my piece is folded. So now I'm going to fold it widthwise like so I can get the midpoint. Okay, it's very important that you get that midpoint. So at that midpoint, I'm just going to create a tiny notch so that I know where my midpoint is. So this is what we have, okay? So now, as you can see, I've transferred my pattern to my fabric. I left ½ inch allowance all the way, but at the side, I left 1.5 inches allowance because remember, I did not add allowance on my pattern. For the center front, I left my ½ inch allowance and then I extended the length to my desired length. So if your pattern paper is long enough for the length of your dress, that's fine. But if not, you must extend the center front and center back to give you your desired length. No need to extend the side pieces because you're going to join the gathers later to extend the length. So for the side back, as you can see, I left 1.5 inches allowance by the side, and for all the other sides, I left ½ inch. Now for my fabric piece, as you can see, I used hairstay and breast pad or wadding to pad them, as you can see now. So now it's time for us to sew. I'm going to place my center front piece and my side front piece right sides facing, and then I'm going to pin them the way I'm going to sew them. I'll join them with ½ inch seam allowance, okay? Just the way you join your normal bustier. For the back piece, this is what the back pieces look like for one side. I'll place the pieces right sides facing and join them with ½ inch seam allowance, and I'll do the same thing for the other two pieces. Place them right sides facing, join them with ½ inch seam allowance. Make sure you iron your seams flat, okay? Very, very important. So as you can see, this is what my piece looks like. I've gone ahead to iron the seams open. So just open your seams and iron them flat. Now I created this tiny loop that I'm going to use to tie, that the client is going to use to tie on their neck, okay? So I just cut out a 1 inch wide piece, folded it, sewed it, and turned it out. Now I'm just placing it on that same line and then I'm pinning it down. I'll go ahead to tack it in place first before I join my lining. So I'm going to join the lining and fabric pieces with ½ inch seam allowance at the top and by the sides, okay? So for the lining, I cut out the exact same thing that I cut for my fabric and I did the exact same sewing for my lining as well. So these are the back pieces. I'm placing the lining on top of the fabric for the back. These are the back pieces, okay? And then first of all, I'm going to join them at the top and then I'm going to join them by the sides, okay? Turn it to the right side and iron it flat. So this is what my piece looks like. As you can see, it's very neat. Now I'm just going to top stitch that curve, okay, by the side, just so that it keeps the lining and the fabric in place so they are one piece. I'll do the same thing for the back. Just go ahead and top stitch that curve. And then I'm going to place the back pieces right sides facing. Then I'm going to join them on that center back with 0.75 inches seam allowance. You can also use 1 inch seam allowance if you want to join that center back. Now from the waist, I'm just marking 9 inches downwards. That's where my zipper is going to stop. So I just mark that so I know where my zipper would end. So I'll put in my zipper from the top to that 9 inch mark. And then from the 9 inch mark, I'm going to sew all the way down to the hem. So after that, this is what we have. I've gone ahead to put in my zipper, very neat. And this is what my front piece looks like. Now I'm going to place the front piece on top of the back piece and I'm going to join them along the sides with the actual body measurements. So this is what we have. As you can see, is very, very neat. I love how this looks already. So now it's time for us to add our gathers piece. This is the point I marked, that midpoint that I marked. Like I said, is very important. My piece was folded, remember, so I just took only one piece for one side. Now I'm going to start from the hem of the gathers piece and I'm going to sew from the hem of the dress. So sew from the hem upwards, both for front and the back. And then when you get to where you have that line on your dress, stop there and then make sure that the midpoint of your gathers piece aligns with the side seam of your dress, okay? And then create your gathers, okay? Create your gathers. So sew a straight line all the way till you get to the that line of your dress and then gather it, okay? Just create tiny, tiny gathers. You can either use gathers or pleats depending on the fabric you're using. If you're using a Mikado silk like I'm using, it's a very thick fabric, so you're better off using pleats rather than gathers. But if you're using a lightweight fabric, you can actually do pleats instead. So just go ahead and do the same thing on both sides, and this is the lovely dress. I went ahead to embellish it with flowers. This is another dress that I made for the same client. On the left, it is an Ankara dress with basque line. If you want to see how I made this dress, then I'm going to leave the link in the pinned comments down below. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.